Married for 3 years, I always thought I had married for love. That was until one afternoon when my best friend added me to an encrypted group chat and dropped a dozen high-definition photos. In the pictures, my husband, who was supposedly on a business trip to Berlin, was holding a woman in a Chanel tweed suit. They were kissing passionately in a VIP lounge at JFK Airport, completely oblivious to the world. Her hand rested flat against his chest, his palm was wrapped around her waist, and their boarding passes lay side by side on the armrest. The destination was clearly visible: Paris. I zoomed in on the photos and stared at the woman's face. I knew her. In fact, the entire Upper East Side wives circle knew her. She was a professional gold digger who constantly hovered around high-end charity galas, surviving in the Vanity Fair on borrowed Hermes bags and a pretty face. Her specialty was targeting wealthy, married men, and her manipulative tactics were legendary. Behind her back, the socialites called her the leech, meaning once she latched onto you, you were going to lose a layer of skin before she let go. And my husband, Julian Vance, the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations and a rising star in the New York tech scene, had clearly been sucked in. In one photo, Julian was looking down at his phone, a smile playing on his lips that I hadn't seen in a very long time. It wasn't his polite networking smile, nor his smug deal-closing smirk. It was a genuine, relaxed, and almost affectionately indulgent curve of the lips. When was the last time he looked at me like that? I thought about it, but I couldn't remember. Maybe during the first 6 months of our marriage, maybe even earlier. Life after the wedding had become like a slowly drying river. At first there were splashes, but eventually all that remained was a barren riverbed covered in gravel. He came home later and later. His business trips became more frequent. When he finally did come home, he locked himself in his study, too lazy to even sit through a full dinner with me. I told myself it was because he was busy. It was a tech startup after all. He had to make every single decision. The pressure was immense, the networking endless. How could he have the time to dote on his wife every day? I even felt I was being overly sensitive, nitpicking over trivial things. But photos don't lie. I stared at that picture of them kissing at the boarding gate for a full minute. Then, I placed my phone face down on the table and took a sip of my espresso. Sitting across from me was an old subordinate of my father, a retired but still heavily influential figure in the Wall Street financial district. He peered at me over his reading glasses, put down his files, and spoke in a calm tone that reminded me of my father. "Are you sure? No regrets?" I flipped my phone over, turning the screen toward him. He looked at it for 2 seconds, handed it back, and spoke as if discussing the weather. "Then let's get to work." I nodded and picked up the landline on the desk to dial a number. "My name is Claire Sterling." That name didn't hold much weight in the New York socialite circles because, for the past 3 years, I had lived entirely as Mrs. Vance. When I went out, I was Julian's wife. When I came home, I was the Vance family's daughter-in-law. During the holidays, I brought gifts to my in-laws. On regular days, I stayed quietly in our white colonial mansion out in the Hamptons, tending to the garden, occasionally making an appearance at my husband's corporate banquets. I dressed appropriately, smiled appropriately, and even spoke at an appropriate volume. Nobody knew my maiden name was Sterling. Nobody knew how deep the Sterling family's roots ran in New York. Nobody knew my father, Richard Sterling, had a nickname in the business world, the King of Manhattan, meaning nearly half of the commercial real estate in this city was directly or indirectly tied to the Sterling name. Nobody knew that at 18, I had earned a master's degree in finance from an Ivy League university. Upon returning home, under my father's arrangement, I used an alias to work as an investment manager at a top-tier private equity firm for 2 years. I handled over 30 projects with 0 losses. Nobody knew any of this because 3 years ago when I married Julian Vance, I chose to hide it all. At the time, I believed love didn't need a pedigree. It didn't need background checks, cold numbers, or flashy titles. I loved him for who he was, and he loved me for my essence. That was enough. My father had warned me. He said marriage wasn't a dinner party. He said hiding my capabilities and marrying down would eventually bite me. I didn't listen. I thought my father was too cynical, too utilitarian. I thought he didn't understand true love. Thinking about it now, I really wanted to slap myself. True love. True love was him flying off to Paris with another woman right when I needed him the most during my pregnancy, ignoring my calls for 3 days straight. On the first day, the phone rang a dozen times before being declined. On the second day, it went straight to voicemail. On the third day, I had the housekeeper call him from her phone. He answered. Hearing my voice, he fell silent for 3 seconds before saying just 3 words. "Stop being dramatic. Stop being dramatic." My OBGYN had just told me I had placenta previa and required absolute bed rest. Otherwise, I could suffer a massive hemorrhage at any moment. I lay alone in the master bedroom on the second floor of the mansion. The baby in my belly occasionally kicked, as if reminding me he was still alive. Outside, it was raining. The heating in the room was turned up high, but I felt ice cold from the inside out. I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. From that day on, I decided I would never shed another tear for this man. Julian and that woman stayed in Paris for a full 2 weeks. That was plenty of time for me to do a lot of things. The first thing was liquidating all the assets I had brought into the Vance family. 3 years ago, when I married him, I brought nearly $1 billion in cash under my personal name, along with 3 complete supply chain networks for his core business lines. Julian used that money to expand aggressively, acquire competitors, and rebrand himself. He transformed from a struggling small-time boss into a young visionary on the covers of business magazines. At tech dinners, people gave him a thumbs up, praising him as a self-made genius, the pride of the city. Self-made. Hearing that made me want to laugh. Those self-made clean hands of his had been digging around in my pockets the entire time. I took 7 days. Through 3 layers of offshore corporate structures and hundreds of fragmented financial channels, I completely reversed the flow of that money. Funds moved from domestic accounts to Singapore, then branched out to the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. Every single step towed the line of absolute legal compliance. On the surface, it looked like standard corporate restructuring. I left absolutely no trace that could be investigated. By the time the CFO of Julian's company realized something was wrong, the corporate accounts were nothing but a thin, hollow shell. The liquid capital that fueled his expansion, the collateral assets used to leverage loans, the supply chain channels that paved his way, they all evaporated overnight. The second thing was reeling in the net. During my 3 years in the Vance house, I wasn't just gardening. Under various pretenses, I had placed 12 people into the core positions of Julian's company. The deputy CFO, the director of operations, the legal counsel, the procurement manager, the head of R&D. These people were all top-tier commercial talents cultivated by the Sterling family years ago. Their resumes were flawlessly impressive, and their abilities were so outstanding that Julian personally hired them. He thought he had struck gold. He thought these people were fiercely loyal to him because of his leadership charisma. He never once considered that their paychecks never came from Vance Innovations. 12 resignation letters appeared in Julian's assistant's inbox on the exact same morning, neatly organized, as if prearranged. The assistant frantically called Julian's phone, but Julian was busy accompanying his sweet little ingenue through the Louvre. The phone rang 6 times and was hung up. The assistant called again. This time it was even more direct. The phone was turned off entirely. I suppose the calls ruined his sweetheart's mood while admiring the Mona Lisa. The third thing was securing the evidence. The housekeeper who had taken care of me in the mansion for 3 years, Martha. Julian always thought she was just a simple, honest woman from the Midwest pulling in $5,000 a month. She worked hard, spoke little, and treated him with the utmost respect. He never looked her in the eye. He certainly didn't know her real name was Martha Higgins, a retired senior investigator from the SEC Financial Crimes Division. She had handled cases involving billions of dollars. After retiring, the Sterling family hired her at a premium. Nominally, she was a housekeeper. In reality, she was a pair of eyes my father had placed by my side. A month ago, that woman approached Martha, Mrs. Vance. That afternoon, Martha spread a stack of printed papers in front of me, her tone as flat as if she were reporting the price of groceries. The sweet Miss Lily took me out to dinner. She offered me $300,000 to add a little something extra to your meals. I took the stack of papers and flipped through them one by one. Screenshots of chat logs were clearly printed on the pages. The other party's avatar was a white camellia. When can you slip it in? The messages read, growing more vicious with every line. I can't wait much longer. Only when she loses this baby will he completely turn to my side. Don't worry about being caught. I'll handle the fallout. Just do as I say. And if we are discovered, Martha had replied. Discovered? So what? Do you really think that useless coward would dare do anything to me? I finished looking at every single page, looked up, and asked Martha, Did you take the money? Martha nodded, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. If I didn't take it, how would I secure the complete chain of evidence? Rest assured, ma'am, she leaves a very messy trail. She didn't delete the wire transfer records, and the chat history was saved locally. I copied everything. Looking at Martha, I couldn't help but laugh. A week later, everything that belonged to me vanished from the mansion. Clothing, jewelry, skincare, cosmetics, photos in frames, books on the shelves, my favorite dinnerware in the kitchen, the diffusers in the bathroom, even the wooden comb I had used for 3 years on the vanity. I left nothing behind. This wasn't a retreat, this was a clean sweep, an erasure of every trace that I had ever existed in this house. The last thing I dealt with was our wedding photo. The $10,000 portrait hung dead center in the living room. In the photo, I was wearing a white veil, leaning against Julian's chest, smiling like I owned the world. He wore a black tuxedo, one hand on my waist, looking down at me with eyes so gentle they could melt. The photographer had said we were the most perfect couple he had ever shot. Julian had laughed, pulled me tighter, and whispered in my ear that he would treat me well for the rest of his life. I took the frame off the wall, looked at it for 3 seconds, pulled out the paper shredder, and fed it in piece by piece. As the blades tore our smiling faces to shreds, I felt absolutely nothing. It had been 3 years. I had shed enough tears for him. Those tears didn't earn his devotion. They only earned his neglect, his annoyance, and a flippant stop being dramatic. Now it was my turn to let him experience what true drama really felt like. I swept all the shredded pieces into a transparent glass jar and placed it squarely in the center of the living room coffee table. Then, I pulled a pre-written card from my bag and slipped it under the jar. The card only had 2 lines. Julian, 3 years ago I came to you with $1 billion. 3 years later, I leave you with $1 billion and the sterling bloodline. Not a single cent remains. Not an ounce of affection is owed. The real reckoning starts today. After writing the last letter, I threw the pen into the trash, turned to Martha, and said, "Let's go." Martha opened the front door for me. Before getting into the car, I looked back at that white colonial mansion one last time. When I moved in 3 years ago, I thought this was the home of my dreams. Now I knew it was merely the conclusion of a harsh lesson. "Where to next, ma'am?" Martha looked at me through the rearview mirror. "To the airport." And then, I looked down and touched my slightly swollen belly, feeling the little life kick gently inside. "To a place he'll never find in this lifetime. We wait until the child is born, until our wings are full, and then we return." As the car drove out of the estate, the oak trees outside the window retreated one by one. I remembered the words my father whispered in my ear on my wedding day. At the time, I thought he was too extreme. Now I understood he was absolutely right. "Claire, you must remember this. The women in the Sterling family don't bleed tears, they bleed ice. If someone dares to stab you, you make them kneel before you and swallow the knife themselves." I kept that knife hidden for 3 years. Today it finally left the sheath. 15 days later, Julian's flight landed at JFK International Airport. He pushed his luggage cart out of the arrivals terminal, accompanied by his sweet Lily. The two had spent a full half-month in Paris, sweeping through every luxury boutique on the Champs-Élysées. The woman's single suitcase had multiplied into 4, all stuffed with Hermès, Chanel, and Louis Vuitton. Every single item was paid for with Julian's credit card. He had even bought her a diamond necklace at the Bulgari boutique in Place Vendôme, swiping his card without even looking at the price tag. "Julian, how are you going to explain things to your wife when you get back?" The woman clung to his arm, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Julian squeezed her hand, a habitual carelessness hanging on his lips. "Explain what? She just sits at home all day anyway. What's there to explain?" The woman smiled even sweeter. The black Maybach was parked at the exit. The driver opened the door. Julian let the woman get in first, then walked around to the other side to get in and head back to the mansion. Once the car merged onto the highway, Julian casually unlocked his phone and scrolled through his call logs. Claire's number sat quietly on the list. The last call was 14 days ago. Duration: 1 minute and 12 seconds. He vaguely remembered the content of that annoying call. She seemed to have said something about not feeling well. He was in a meeting, brushed her off with 2 sentences, and hung up. He didn't overthink it, tossing the phone back into his pocket. By the time the car drove into the estate, the sky had already darkened. Julian looked through the window at his white mansion and noticed something very strange. The porch lights were off. The entire house was pitch black, as if nobody lived there. "Wait in the car for a minute." He patted the woman's hand and got out. The moment he pushed open the front door, a hollow chill hit him in the face. The living room curtains were wide open. The light from the street lamp spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a ghostly pale glow over the entire room. All the furniture was exactly where it belonged, but Julian felt something was missing. He took a few steps forward before realizing it was Claire's belongings. All her books on the shelves were gone. Her essay collections, financial journals, and original French novels had completely vanished. All that remained were a few thriller novels he had casually stuffed in there, leaning haphazardly against each other. On the coffee table, the celadon vase she always kept there was gone. In its place was a transparent glass jar, stuffed full of shredded paper, reflecting a chaotic glare under the streetlights. He stepped closer to look. His pupils contracted violently. It was their wedding photo. shredded into thousands of pieces by a paper shredder, stuffed into the jar like trash. It was placed squarely in the most conspicuous spot in the living room, as if waiting for someone to admire it. Julian's heart skipped a beat. He saw the card pressed beneath the jar. He pulled it out and flipped it open. The 2 lines of text stabbed into his eyes like twin daggers. Julian, 3 years ago I came to you with $1 billion. 3 years later, I leave you with $1 billion and the Sterling bloodline. Sterling bloodline. Sterling. When he read that word out loud, his voice trembled, not out of fear, but because he finally realized Claire wasn't an ordinary woman. She was Richard Sterling's daughter. She was the sole heir to the King of Manhattan. When he married her, he thought he had hit the jackpot, getting a gentle, obedient, unambitious rich girl who only wanted to stay home and raise a family. She was practically a walking ATM sent from heaven. He spent 3 years squandering her dowry, utilizing her resources, stepping on her shoulders to climb the corporate ladder. He never once imagined she would turn into a viper, suddenly biting back in the dead of night. He charged up to the 2nd floor. The master bedroom door was wide open. Her half of the walk-in closet was totally empty. Even the hangers had been stripped clean. Not a single bottle of skincare remained on the vanity. She didn't even leave behind the half-used tube of hand cream. In the study, the safe was hanging wide open. Every single document, contract, and equity certificate inside was gone. In the nursery, the pastel yellow crib had been dismantled. Not a single stuffed animal was left. Stuck to the wall was a single sticky note with just one line. You gave this up yourself. Julian gripped that sticky note, his knuckles turning white, the bones in his fingers popping. From behind came the sound of high heels clicking up the stairs. Julian, why aren't you turning on the lights? It's so dark out here. The woman's voice abruptly cut off when she saw the state of the master bedroom. Julian spun around abruptly, brushed past her shoulder, and charged down the stairs. The rims of his eyes flashed with a redness she had never seen before. Not tears, but bloodshot veins surging up after something inside him had suddenly snapped. He rushed out the front door and roared into the empty front yard. Martha! No answer. He roared again, his voice cracking this time. Martha! The kitchen door was pushed open from the inside. Martha walked out, unhurried, holding a cup of tea, looking as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She wore a sharp, tailored gray coat and stood ramrod straight. The aura she exuded was absolutely nothing like a housekeeper. Julian grabbed her by the shoulders. Where is Claire? What happened to the house? Where's her stuff? Where is she? Where's the money? Martha didn't struggle. She glanced down at his hands gripping her shoulders, then raised her eyes. Her gaze was as calm as a mirror, reflecting straight into his soul. Mr. Vance, her voice wasn't loud, but every word drove into his ears like nails. Ma'am asked me to pass on a message to you. What message? Martha tilted her head slightly, a ghost of a smile appearing on her lips. It wasn't a housekeeper's smile. It was the smile of a hunter watching prey finally drop into the trap. The game officially begins. Julian froze in place. His fingers loosened, his arms dropping to his sides. He looked like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water in his face. Martha walked past him, her steps steady, her flat shoes clicking sharply against the entryway floor. Before pushing open the front door, she paused, turned her head, and glanced at him. By the way, Mr. Vance, I need to make one thing clear to you. I have never worked a single day in my life as a housekeeper for the Vance family. I belong to the Sterling family. She paused, then added the final blow. I always have. The door clicked shut behind her. The sound of footsteps faded away, eventually swallowed by the slam of a car door. Julian stood alone in the empty mansion, still clutching the sticky note he had torn from the nursery wall. The fresh sweat from his palm had blurred the ink. In the living room, the street lamp illuminated the glass jar, making the pulverized remains of the wedding photo look exceptionally harsh. The card lay face up on the coffee table, the 2 lines of text stark and clear under the light. Outside, a car engine started, the roar fading into the distance. This mansion, where he had lived for 3 years, was now so quiet that the only sound left was his own breathing. He pulled out his phone and dialed Claire's number. The line connected, but the voice that came through wasn't Claire's. It was a man's steady, professional, emotionless voice. Hello, Mr. Vance. I am Miss Claire Sterling's appointed legal counsel. My name is Arthur Hayes. From today onward, all matters between you and Miss Brace. Sterling will be handled exclusively by me. The divorce agreement has been sent to your email. Please review and respond within 48 hours. If you fail to reply, we will consider it your default acceptance of all terms. That is all. Have a pleasant evening. The call disconnected. Julian stood in the middle of the living room holding his phone. The streetlight stretched his shadow endlessly across the floor. He opened his mouth to say something, but there was no one left to listen. He didn't know how long he stood in that empty living room. He only knew the light outside the window dimmed inch by inch, fading from a dusky yellow to pitch black. The sticky note in his hand was thoroughly soaked in his sweat. The words "you gave this up yourself" had blurred into a blob of ink, as if even the letters were mocking him. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant. A barrage of exclamation points crowded the preview screen. "Mr. Vance, you're finally back in the country. Disaster struck. The corporate accounts..." He didn't finish reading the message. He tossed the phone onto the sofa, collapsed into the cushions, and closed his eyes. Two images kept flipping back and forth in his mind. Martha's final backward glance at the door, and that glass jar stuffed full of shredded wedding photos. Martha's voice still echoed in his ears. "I have never worked a single day in my life as a housekeeper for the Vance family. I belong to the Sterling family. I always have." Julian suddenly let out a laugh. The sound was piercingly harsh in the empty mansion. It felt like someone had struck a match in the dead of night, briefly illuminating something terrible before plunging back into deeper darkness. 3 years. That woman had been operating undercover right under his nose for 3 straight years, brewing his espresso every morning, taking his suits to the dry cleaners every Wednesday. Every time Claire went to visit her family, Martha followed behind with bags of gifts, calling out, "Careful on the steps, ma'am." He used to think this housekeeper was a bit too attentive, less like a maid, more like a butler. Now he knew. She was neither. She was a blade the Sterling patriarch had kept by his daughter's side. "Julian, what's wrong?" The woman had slipped out of the car at some point and now stood at the living room entrance. Her high heels clicked tentatively on the marble floor. Seeing no reaction, she took a few steps closer, softening her voice. "Are you okay? Should I pour you a glass of water?" Julian's eyes snapped open. "Who told you to come inside?" The woman recoiled, startled by his roar, nearly dropping her Hermes bag. Her eyes immediately turned red. That instant, pitiful look worked like a charm in Paris. "I was worried because you didn't come out. Why are you yelling at me? I'm not the one who pissed your wife off. She left on her own." "Get out!" he practically roared. He pointed toward the study on the first floor. "Go wait in there. Don't come out unless I tell you to." Lily bit her lip, tears pattering down her face, but Julian didn't want to look at her anymore. In Paris, if she shed a single tear, his heart would ache and he would wipe it away. Now, watching her cry, the only thought in his head was, Claire never cried like this. When that woman cried, she locked herself in her room, never even letting him hear the sound. Lily didn't dare say another word. Clutching her bag, she scurried into the study. Before the door closed, he could hear her muttering under her breath. "She's so dramatic. If she wants to leave, just leave. Why make such a scene?" Julian didn't respond. He picked up his phone again, forcing himself to read the dozen messages his assistant had sent. "Mr. Vance, the finance department just filed an emergency report. All associated capital accounts under your wife's name were drained over the past 2 weeks. 3 offshore trusts were liquidated. Everything went through perfectly legal compliance channels. We can't trace it. 12 middle management executives didn't show up for work today. Human resources can't reach them by phone. Later, we received synchronized emails. Immediate resignations. Mr. Vance, the board of directors has exploded. The chairman demands you return immediately. Mr. Vance, your activities in Paris were leaked to the press. Sterling Capital bought the front page of the financial news. The headline is, CEO of Vance Innovations tours Paris with Mistress. Heiress wife leaves with nothing. The comment sections are slaughtering us. The company's stock dropped 11% today. Almost $1 billion in market cap evaporated. The last message was sent 2 minutes ago. Mr. Vance, Chairman Sterling just posted a single sentence via the official Sterling Capital X account. Congratulations to Mr. Vance on his new romance. The Sterling family will no longer intrude. Julian threw the phone back onto the sofa. He wasn't angry at his assistant. He was angry at himself. Why had he never turned his phone on once while in Paris? Why was he so oblivious to such a catastrophic collapse in his own company? The more terrifying realization was that Claire's entire withdrawal operation was executed exactly during the 2 weeks he was in Paris. Not a day more, not a day less. What did that mean? It meant she had been waiting for an opportunity. Waiting for him to leave, waiting for him to drop his guard, waiting for him to personally flip the switch on his own destruction. And him? He handed her that switch without a second of hesitation. She said she wanted to go to Paris, so he booked the tickets. She said, "Don't let your wife find out." So he turned off his phone the whole trip. She said she wanted to kiss under the Eiffel Tower, so he kissed another woman in the most romantic place on earth. Now, recalling every single image felt like taking a magnifying glass to his own eyeballs. Mr. Vance. At some point, another figure had appeared in the doorway. It wasn't Martha. It was a man in a black suit, in his 40s, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, holding a manila folder. He stood impeccably straight, looking like he just stepped out of a legal drama. It was Mr. Hayes, the lawyer. "Who are you? How did you get in?" "Arthur Hayes, Miss Claire Sterling's private legal counsel. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in." Miss Hayes placed the folder on the entryway console and pushed it toward Julian, his tone as casual as a courier delivering a package. "This is the formal divorce agreement Miss Sterling instructed me to deliver. 3 copies. Please review." Julian didn't take it. He stared at the yellow folder like it was a snake. "Where is she?" "Miss Sterling has not authorized me to answer that question. I am her husband." "Soon-to-be ex-husband," Mr. Hayes corrected, his tone strictly business. "Mr. Vance, I will briefly outline the core terms of the agreement for you. First, Miss Sterling forfeits her entire portion of marital assets tied to Vance Innovations, estimated at around $3 billion. Consider it compensation for your 3 years of marriage." When he said the word compensation, the corner of his mouth twitched, as if even he found the word absurd, but his professional etiquette demanded he say it. "Second, regarding the child conceived during the marriage." Mr. Hayes paused. "Miss Sterling is still pregnant. The agreement explicitly states that upon birth, the child will be raised solely by Miss Sterling and will take the surname Sterling. Mr. Vance waives all visitation rights." Julian's eyelid twitched violently. "Third, Mr. Vance must complete the formal legal dissolution of the marriage within 2 months of signing this agreement. Failure to comply will result in a court mandate. That is all." He pulled a fountain pen from his suit pocket and placed it next to the folder on the coffee table. "Mr. Vance, I highly recommend you sign this as quickly as possible. The longer you drag this out, the worse it will be for you." "I'm not signing it." Julian's voice was so low it sounded like it was being ground out of his throat. Mr. Hayes adjusted his glasses. "Your refusal to sign will not change the outcome. Miss Sterling has authorized me to file a direct divorce lawsuit on the grounds of severe marital misconduct. Under current law, you will be designated as the at-fault party." "At-fault party?" "Yes," Mr. Hayes said. "Touring Paris with another woman while your wife is pregnant is legally classified as severe marital misconduct. If you don't want the complete chain of evidence paraded out in a public courtroom, I suggest you respect Miss Sterling's final act of goodwill." "Goodwill?" "Yes. Goodwill." Mr. Hayes folded his hands in front of him. "If you don't sign within the allotted time, I will present to the court the complete evidence of Miss Lily Brooks bribing Miss Sterling's personal housekeeper with the intent to administer drugs to terminate Miss Sterling's pregnancy." Julian felt like he had been struck in the temple with a blunt instrument. "What did you say? You didn't know?" Mr. Hayes's tone finally shifted slightly. It was highly restrained but carried unmistakable contempt. "Well, Mr. Vance, it seems the scenery in Paris really was quite captivating." He said nothing more, gave a curt nod, and turned to leave. His leather shoes echoed twice in the foyer. The front door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place. The living room fell back into a deathly silence. Julian grabbed his phone and dialed the woman's number. Lily. The love of his life. The woman who had told him in Paris that being with him was the only thing that made life worth living. Even though she was right in the study, he didn't want to look at her face. The call connected instantly. "Julian, you finally—" "Did you approach Martha?" The breathing on the other end of the line halted for a second. "What? What, Martha? What are you talking about?" Lily's voice spiked in pitch, carrying the instinctive defensiveness of someone caught in a lie. "How much did you pay her? Who are you talking about? Who told you such nonsense? Was it Claire? Is she complaining to you?" "It's all lies. She just wants to ruin us. I'm asking you, how much did you pay her?" Julian's voice didn't rise, but every word was compressed to the absolute limit before erupting. The study door pushed open. Lily stood in the doorway, her face pale as a ghost. She stared at Julian's back, her lips trembling for a long time before she finally stammered out, I did it for us. I just wanted you to be completely free of her." Julian didn't turn around. He tossed the phone aside, rested his hands on his knees, and stared down at the glass jar on the coffee table. The shattered pieces of the wedding photo glowed pale under the light. Claire's figure in the white veil had been ripped into 100 pieces, every single one of them smiling at him. He suddenly remembered the day of the wedding. Richard Sterling had called him into his study, closed the door, and said one thing to him. "Julian, I am handing my only daughter over to you." If you treat her well, everything the Sterling family owns will be yours in the future. But if you wrong her, the old man paused, using a tone Julian didn't understand then, but understood perfectly now. You must remember, she is a daughter of the Sterling family. At the time, he thought it was a blessing. Now he knew it was a warning. Outside, it suddenly started pouring rain. The raindrops battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, rushing down the glass as if the city itself were trying to wash away stains that couldn't be cleansed. Lily's crying echoed from the study doorway. Pathetic, intermittent sobs. Listening to it, Julian only felt something burning in his chest. He didn't know what to call that burning feeling, but he knew it was the manifestation of Claire's second message to him. The game officially begins. Lily's greatest skill in life was crying. She cried from the study door to the living room sofa, from the sofa to Julian's feet, ultimately sitting on the rug and hugging his calves. That delicate face, which had taken over 1,000 selfies in Paris, was completely scrunched up in tears. She was genuinely terrified, not because Julian was yelling at her. A man yelling meant nothing. After he yelled, he always softened. That was how it always worked. What she feared was the phrase the lawyer had used. The complete chain of evidence. When she approached Martha, Martha hadn't said much. She just asked 3 words. Cash or wire? Lily chose wire because she thought it was convenient. A few taps on her phone and it was done. Who would actually check? Now, she wished she could chop off the hands that held that phone. Julian, please listen to my explanation. Her voice squeezed through her sobs, sticky and cloying like soggy cotton candy. I really didn't mean to hurt her. I just love you too much. I was afraid she would use the baby to trap you forever. I was afraid you'd never be free of her. Julian looked down at her. He had never looked at her with this kind of expression before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't annoyance, it was a bone-chilling scrutiny. Like picking up a carton of milk from a grocery store shelf, checking the expiration date, and realizing it had been expired for a full year. How much did you pay her? $300,000. $300,000. Julian repeated the number, tasting rust on his tongue. You tried to murder my child for $300,000. No. Lily's head snapped up, shaking tears onto his pant leg. I didn't want to kill anyone. I just told her to add a little something to Claire's food, to make her feel unwell. How could I actually kill someone? The person you hired? Julian bent down and pinched her chin, his voice scraping out from the depths of the earth. Her name isn't Martha. She isn't a housekeeper. Her name is Martha Higgins. He looked at Lily's bewildered face and suddenly let out a laugh. A laugh uglier than crying. Do you have any idea who Martha Higgins is? Lily shook her head. Never mind. Julian stood up, pulling his leg out of her grasp. You don't need to know. You only need to know one thing. Your $300,000 is now their star witness exhibit in court. With that, he walked upstairs. His heavy footsteps echoed on the staircase, shaking the entire house. Lily sat paralyzed on the living room rug. Tears still flowed, but her eyes had shifted from fear to fury. In her mind, she blamed everything on Claire. That bitch set a trap. She obviously wanted a divorce for a long time and deliberately had Martha play along to bait me. Then she gathered all the evidence and ran off playing the victim. What a brilliant act of framing and escaping. Lily wiped her tears and dragged herself off the floor. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she was of her own logic. Claire was a deeply manipulative woman. On the surface, gentle and unbothered, but behind the scenes, more ruthless than anyone. But that was fine. With that annoying woman out of the picture, Julian was hers. He was only mad now because the company was in trouble. Once things settled down in a few days, he would come back to her. After all, he had told her in Paris that being with her was the only thing that made life interesting. As for Claire's unborn child, Lily bit her lip. Better if it was never born at all. Unfortunately for her, her wishful thinking didn't last long. 3 days later, at dawn, Lily was jolted awake by her phone ringing. It was her partner from her boutique lifestyle studio, sounding like a cat with its tail stepped on. Lily, it's bad. The studio was bought out. Lily rubbed her eyes, half asleep. What buyout? Who bought it? Why are you acting crazy this early in the morning? Sterling. A subsidiary of Sterling Capital called Obsidian Capital. They sent an official email at 7 this morning. They've completed 100% equity acquisition of Lily Media. Starting today, we're all out. Lily's drowsiness vanished instantly. She jumped out of bed barefoot, rushed to her laptop, and opened her email. Sure enough, a politely worded but brutally firm acquisition notice sat at the top of her inbox. Dear Miss Brooks, Obsidian Capital has completed the full equity acquisition of Lily's lifestyle studio as of today. Per the acquisition agreement, the original management and founding team must complete the handover and vacate within 3 business days. All your personal access within the company was revoked at 8:00 a.m. today. Furthermore, regarding certain contract and accounting irregularities during your tenure, we reserve the right to pursue further legal investigation. The signature was a name she had never heard of, but the word Sterling stabbed directly into her retinas. Lily's hand gripping the mouse began to tremble. Lily's lifestyle studio. That was her most valuable asset. Over the past 2 years, Julian had poured nearly $10 million into it to build her brand, secure high-end commercial deals, and incubate her personal IP. Her entire facade as an independent female entrepreneur was built on that studio. And now, with one email, they had swept her out the door. This is insane. She grabbed her phone to call the police, but her partner's next words nailed her to the floor. Lily, the last line of the email. About pursuing further legal investigation regarding contracts and accounting. Lily, our books can't survive an audit. Lily's phone slipped from her palm and clattered onto the floorboards. She knew exactly what was wrong with those books. Fabricated event expenses, forged company seals, pocketing client deposits without fulfilling contracts. Pulling any single one of those out into the light would be enough to destroy her. Claire didn't just want to take her company. Claire wanted to ruin her entirely. And the day wasn't even over. At 2 p.m., while Lily sat on the couch in a daze, her phone rang again. This time it was her mother, panic lacing her voice. Lily, look at the news, you're trending! Almost by reflex, she opened social media. Trending at number 17 on X was the hashtag number Paris Sweetheart. Right next to it was a blazing red-hot icon. The top post was from a massive celebrity gossip account. 9 photos documenting her entire itinerary with Julian in Paris. Kissing under the Eiffel Tower, holding hands on the Champs-Élysées, a side profile of him swiping his black card for her in a boutique. The images were crystal clear. They even caught her exact expression as she stood on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek outside the Louvre. The caption read, "Insider reveals CEO of Vance Innovations took his sweetheart to Paris. Meanwhile, his billionaire heiress wife leaves him with nothing." Netizens joke, the Paris tickets were a gift. The severance package is the main course. The comment section was a boiling cauldron. Laugh my ass off. His wife is at home pregnant, and he goes to Paris to play true love. Studio got acquired? What the hell? The Sterling family moves fast. Context for the uninformed. The Sterlings are old money. Billions in assets. This girl's brain was kicked by a horse to mess with a Sterling heiress. Stop roasting her, guys. She already got kicked out of her own company's Slack channel. Lily's face burned. She threw her phone into the couch cushions and curled up into a ball, shaking violently. Then, she remembered something even more critical. She bolted upstairs and threw open the door to Julian's study. Julian was sitting at his desk, a pile of documents spread out before him, his face ashen. He had clearly seen the news, because his laptop screen was open to the exact same trending hashtag. Julian, how dare you come looking for me? Julian didn't even lift his eyelids. It wasn't me, I didn't leak these photos, I'm not that stupid. Lily stammered, desperate. It was Claire. She definitely released them. She wants to destroy me. She wants to. Wants to what? Julian finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, making him look like a trapped beast pushed to the brink. Did she hire someone to kidnap you and drag you to Paris? Did she force you to kiss me in the middle of the street? Lily opened her mouth, but not a single word came out. Do you have any idea? Julian leaned back in his chair, his voice sounding entirely drained of life. That because of this trend, my company's stock dropped another 9% today? My father just called. He's convening a board meeting tomorrow. He wants me to give a public explanation. Lily stood frozen. She didn't know what a board meeting was, and she didn't understand stocks, or why a single news article would make them drop. She only knew she was miserable right now, and Julian wasn't comforting her. In the past, if she even furrowed her brow, he would ask what was wrong. Now she was crying her eyes out, and he couldn't even be bothered to look at her. You've changed, she said, her voice shaking. Julian looked at her and suddenly smiled. That smile carried an emotion she had never seen on his face before. Not gentleness, not indulgence. It was the self-deprecating realization of monumental stupidity. I haven't changed, he said. I've just finally seen clearly. He stood up, walked around the desk, and stood in front of her, looking down. Lily, the difference between you and Claire isn't a pair of tickets to Paris. It's $1 billion. Lily looked as if she had been slapped. All the color drained from her face. Julian didn't look at her again. He walked past her, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded away, leaving Lily standing alone in the study. Before her was a desk covered in financial reports and stock charts, every single red line plummeting straight down. She remembered sitting by the Seine in Paris, sipping wine, feeling like she had already won. She had asked Julian back then, "Won't she be mad if she finds out?" Julian had replied, "If she finds out, so what?" Now she knew. The roses in Paris only had a 15-day shelf life. The boardroom of Vance Innovations was on the 27th floor. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. In the past, when Julian stood here, he felt the entire city was beneath his feet. Today, standing here, he felt the entire city was waiting to watch him become a joke. The boardroom was packed. Along the mahogany table sat shareholders, board members, and senior executives, nearly 40 people all staring at him. Their eyes held worry, schadenfreude, or the numb exhaustion of wanting the meeting to be over. The only thing missing was the respect they used to look at him with. Julian sat at the head of the table. A cup of cold black coffee sat in front of him. He hadn't taken a single sip since entering. His father, Robert Vance, sat at the opposite end of the long table, his face like iron. "Let's begin." The old man slapped a folder onto the table. Today's agenda: Vance Innovations' core businesses are hemorrhaging in the first and second quarters. The stock has plummeted over 40% in half a month. Does anyone have anything to say? The room was silent for 3 seconds before erupting. "Mr. Vance, all my major clients were poached by Sterling Capital last week. Their quotes are 30% lower than ours, and they're locking them into lifetime contracts with priority access to Sterling Financial Services. We can't compete with this. Every lead we chase dies." A VP of marketing slammed his file on the table. "Finance is the same. After your wife pulled her capital, our cash flow can only sustain us until next quarter. 3 new R&D projects are suspended. Suppliers are hounding us for final payments. My department lost 12 people this month. They all bolted. It was the core group your wife brought in. Now they're all working at Sterling. They didn't even change their desks, just swapped their ID badges. Sterling's hiring speed is leaving us in the dust. It isn't just middle management. 2 directors from design left too. Word is Sterling offered double their annual salaries." Julian's fingers curled involuntarily against the tabletop. Over the chaotic complaints, a voice suddenly cut in, laced with undisguised hostility. "I want to ask the CEO a question." The speaker was board member Davies, the 4th largest shareholder of Vance Innovations, and one of the people who most vehemently opposed Julian marrying Claire. Back then, Julian thought Davies was just jealous. Looking back now, the man had simply lived 30 years longer and possessed much sharper eyes. "Tell me, Julian, when you went to Paris, did you ever consider what you would be coming back to?" Davies leaned back in his chair, his tone dangerously even. "I'm not here to pry into your personal life. Who you went to Paris with, for how long, or how much you spent, I don't care. But Vance Innovations had 12 core executives poached and billions of dollars in capital drained. All of this happened over exactly 15 days, and your phone was shut off the entire time." He paused, hammering out every word. "I want to ask on behalf of everyone sitting here, Julian, are you the CEO of Vance Innovations, or are you Lily Brooks's personal tour guide?" The air was sucked out of the room. No one spoke. Everyone waited for Julian's response. Julian remained silent for 5 seconds. "Mr. Davies is right," his voice was hoarse, but he steadied it. "I was negligent for those 2 weeks. It's my fault. I offer no excuses." Davies clearly didn't expect him to admit it so readily and was briefly taken aback. Julian continued. "Client attrition, I will personally lead the negotiations to win them back. The cash flow crisis, I have personal assets I can inject into the company. As for the personnel," he paused. A wave of bitterness rose in his throat, but he swallowed it down. "Those people weren't poached. Those people always belonged to the Sterlings. They never belonged to Vance Innovations. They were simply here executing a 3-year undercover operation." But he couldn't say that out loud. "As for the personnel, I'll restructure the team immediately." He opened his hands, sweeping his gaze across everyone in the room. "Gentlemen, Vance Innovations didn't get here easily. I created this mess, and I will take full responsibility for fixing it." After a low murmur of discussion, the expressions of most people in the room softened slightly. Davies scoffed but didn't press further. After all, he was the only outsider. Everyone else was either named Vance or had deep ties to the Vance family. Robert Vance hadn't spoken a word, nor had he looked at his son once. He stared down at the folder in front of him. The gold-embossed words Vance Innovations Board of Directors blurred in his cloudy eyes. He was thinking of something else. He was thinking of his daughter-in-law, Claire. For the 3 years she was married into the Vance family, she visited him at the old estate every month. When his legs ached, she pushed his wheelchair through the garden. When his blood pressure spiked, she learned a complete low-sodium recipe book and came over every weekend to cook for him personally. Once, when he slipped with his cane, she ran faster than the nurses, skinning her knees on the floor tiles. They were bruised for half a month, but she never complained once. And his son, while his daughter-in-law was pregnant, had taken another woman to Paris. So, when the meeting progressed to the third agenda item, the emergency motion on whether Julian Vance should continue to serve as the executive CEO, the massive LCD screen in the corner of the room, which had been silent, suddenly lit up. The video call chime rang twice. A figure appeared on the screen. A woman. She wore a sharply tailored cream blazer, her hair pulled up to reveal the elegant lines of her neck. Her face held little emotion, her brow carrying a faint, unbothered serenity, but everyone in the boardroom gasped. It was Claire. Yet she looked completely unlike the quiet, gently smiling Mrs. Vance who used to stand behind Julian 3 years ago. She looked like a completely different person. Or rather, she had finally reverted to who she was always meant to be. "Good morning, Board of Directors." Claire's voice came through the speakers, crisp, steady, devoid of excess emotion. "I am Claire Sterling. Apologies, due to the time difference, I can't be there in person and must participate in today's meeting via this method." The meeting secretary frantically explained, "Miss Sterling currently holds 32% of Vance Innovations shares. According to company bylaws, she has the right to participate in this board meeting remotely." 32%. That number dropped like a depth charge, exploding silently in the room. Everyone was doing mental math. 25% was her dowry. Where did the extra 7% come from? No one dared ask. "Let's stick to the agenda," Claire said. "We are on item 3, correct?" The secretary stammered, "Yes." Claire nodded slightly. Her gaze crossed the screen, as if bridging thousands of miles, and landed squarely on Julian sitting at the head of the table. No, not as if. She was looking right at him from thousands of miles away. Across the distance he had personally gifted her. Across the billions in net worth he had personally squandered. Across an unborn child. Since it is the third item, her voice was light, like a feather landing on water. Yet it sent ripples through the entire room, I suppose, as a shareholder. I should cast my vote. Julian's fingers violently clenched against the tabletop. On the screen, Claire tilted her head slightly, a ghost of a curve appearing at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile. It was an expression he hadn't seen in far too long, yet recognized instantly. It was the calm that settled over her face right before she made an irrevocable decision. "I vote," she articulated every syllable perfectly, "for his dismissal." The boardroom was as if someone had hit the mute button. Every murmur, every breath, every squeak of a chair vanished. Only Claire's voice echoed in the air. Dismissal. Not opposition. Not abstention. Dismissal. Julian looked at the familiar yet foreign woman on the screen. His lips moved, wanting to say something, but his throat felt blocked. He realized he had known this face for 3 years, yet had never seen her wear this expression. Cold, sharp, in absolute control. He suddenly remembered an old proverb he had heard a long time ago. A tiger father doesn't breed a dog daughter. He had lived too smoothly these past 3 years. He had actually forgotten the old saying. The voting results will be published within 3 business days. Claire gave a slight nod to the camera. "I wish you all a pleasant meeting." The screen went black. The air in the boardroom didn't resume flowing. The shareholders exchanged terrified glances. Nobody dared be the first to speak. Even Robert Vance's face changed color. Not out of anger, but because he hadn't expected Claire to strike so ruthlessly, so directly, leaving absolutely no room for maneuver. He knew what his son was thinking right now, but he knew his daughter-in-law better. Claire never did things just on the surface layer. If she said dismissal, it meant she had already prepared every subsequent step for after the dismissal succeeded. As if to validate the old man's premonition, the secretary's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his face drained of all color, turning a sickly gray. Mr. Vance." His voice trembled. "Sterling Capital's official PR account just released a statement a minute ago. Read it," Robert Vance ordered in a deep voice. The secretary lowered his head and read out word by word, his voice shaking. "Sterling Capital announcement. Operating on the principles of friendly negotiation and long-term development, Sterling Capital has entered into a deep strategic partnership with key shareholders of Vance Innovations. Currently, Sterling-affiliated capital controls 36.8% of Vance Innovations' equity. We urge the Vance Innovations Board of Directors to prioritize the interests of all shareholders and make prudent decisions in the current severe climate." 36.8%. The boardroom completely exploded. 36.8%. Plus the minor shareholders she had good relations with, the actual voting power she controlled already far exceeded 1/3. A board member slammed his hand on the table and stood up. This isn't just a matter of dismissal anymore. She has veto power. Robert, your daughter-in-law hid herself too well. She vanished for 3 months, and the moment she shows up, she wipes us all out. Robert Vance closed his eyes. He didn't argue, because no one had said anything wrong. From beginning to end, Julian hadn't spoken a single word. He sat at the head of the table, staring at the darkened screen for a very, very long time. The screen reflected his own face. Pale, hollow, like a prisoner just dragged off his throne. He remembered when Claire married him. He had knelt in front of Richard Sterling and made a promise. Dad, I swear I will never let her suffer the slightest grievance in this lifetime. 3 years later, Claire voted for his dismissal through a screen without a single unnecessary word. No crying, no accusations. No, do you know how much you hurt me? Just a clean, decisive dismissal and an icy corporate equity announcement. This was the daughter of the Sterling family, his wife, the mother of his child, the greatest misjudgment of his entire life. The boardroom door pushed open. The assistant poked his head in and called out timidly, "Mr. Vance, there are reporters downstairs. They said they received the press release from Sterling and want to interview you regarding the dismissal motion." The response was Robert Vance's cane smashing heavily against the floor, a deafening crack that startled everyone in the room. What else is there to say? The old man's voice finally cracked, like a tectonic plate splitting after being under pressure for too long. "When you were hugging that lily in Paris, did you ever think about today?" Julian stood up without a word. His chair scraped backward with a harsh screech. He didn't answer. His father didn't answer. None of the people present answered. He just walked step by step toward the boardroom door, rested his hand on the handle, paused for 2 seconds, and said 3 words in a voice only he could hear. "Claire Sterling." The door closed behind him. In the boardroom, nearly 40 shareholders looked at each other in dismay. The coffee on the table had gone completely cold. And outside the window, Vance Innovations' stock was still falling. 3 years later, Zurich, Switzerland. On the top floor of Sterling Capital's European headquarters, Claire sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the snow line of the Alps gleam gold in the setting sun. Spread out on the desk was a document Mr. Hayes had sent over yesterday, the complete financial status of Vance Innovations over the past 3 years. Using a silver fountain pen, she wrote 3 words on the cover of the report: "Ready to harvest." A knock on the door sounded twice. The door pushed open, and a little head poked in first. His hair was combed flawlessly, a tiny suit and bow tie arranged perfectly. A pair of jet-black eyes darted around the room before his entire little body squeezed through the crack in the door. "Mommy!" Little Leo Sterling stood in front of the desk, hands behind his back, his posture ramrod straight, looking exactly like a senior executive arriving to deliver a report. He was 3 years old this year. More accurately, 3 years and 2 months. Born in Zurich, holding a Swiss passport, fluent in English, Mandarin, French, and German. At fine dining restaurants, he could chat with the chef in French about the origins of cheese. At the Science Museum, he could explain the blockchain in English to the university students next to him. "Do you want to eat chocolate cake today?" Claire picked him up and set him on her lap. Leo shook his head. "Want to play with the new Lego set?" He shook his head again. Then he pulled a hand from behind his back. Clutched in his fist was a piece of paper. "Mommy," his voice was milky and sweet, but his expression was intensely serious. "I looked up a person on the internet today." "Who?" "Julian Vance." Claire's fingers paused. In 3 years, the number of times this name had come out of his mouth could be counted on one hand. It wasn't deliberate avoidance. It was just that this person had become nothing more than a line of data on a ledger. Former CEO of Vance Innovations. Stock dropped 71% from its peak. Core businesses cannibalized by Sterling. Dropped out of the Forbes top 500 this year. That was all. But Leo didn't know any of this. He only knew one thing. His last name was Sterling, not Vance. He had started asking why he didn't have a dad at age 3, asking so persistently that Claire had an answer memorized. "Mommy," he smoothed out the printed paper. On it was a blurry photo of a man, clearly screenshotted from a web page. "This person looks a lot like me." Claire glanced down. It did look like him. The brow, the bridge of the nose, the curve of the lips, it was practically carved from the same mold. Genetics were a mystical thing. She carried him for 10 months, and the child ended up looking exactly like the man who didn't even know his birth date. Fortunately, his brain didn't take after him. "And so?" she asked. "And so I want to know." Leo tilted his head, thinking for 2 seconds before asking a question that caught Claire entirely off guard. "Mommy, is he the idiot?" Claire couldn't hold back a laugh. "Why do you ask that?" Because Grandma Martha said he didn't want us. I think a man who doesn't even want someone as amazing as Mommy must be a total idiot. Claire glanced at the door. Martha was standing there holding a plate of fruit, unable to suppress the corners of her mouth from rising. Claire pulled her gaze back and pinched Leo's little cheek. You want to see him? Leo thought about it, then nodded very seriously. Not to claim him, just to take a look, to see what an idiot looks like in person. A month later, a private jet flying in from Zurich landed at JFK International Airport. Sterling Capital's corporate convoy was already waiting outside the private terminal. 3 black Maybachs lined up, the security team standing at attention. When Claire led Leo down the stairs, Mr. Hayes was already waiting by the car. Miss Sterling, he handed over a tablet. The arrangements for tonight's gala are complete. The confirmed attendee list from Vance Innovations includes Julian Vance. Does he know I'm back? He does not. Mr. Hayes adjusted his glasses. He only knows that Sterling Capital is sending a high-level executive tonight. He doesn't know exactly who. After all, you haven't made a public appearance in the States in 3 years. Claire nodded, leaning down to lift Leo into the car. Nervous? She asked. Leo was adjusting his little bow tie. Hearing this, he looked up at her, his expression suggesting the question was incredibly childish. Mommy, he said, am I supposed to be? Claire smiled. This child really didn't take after his father. At 8 p.m., a red carpet was rolled out in front of New York's most exclusive private club. Financial reporters lined both sides, flashbulbs popping incessantly as people walked up the steps. Tonight's gala was hosted by Sterling Capital. Nominally, it was to celebrate the successful expansion of Sterling's European operations. In reality, it was Claire throwing herself a homecoming show. It had been 3 years. This city had almost forgotten what she looked like. It was time for a reminder. When the double gold-plated doors were slowly pushed open by the staff, all the lights in the banquet hall dimmed for 2 seconds. Then, a spotlight snapped on, tracking straight onto Claire. She wore a midnight blue velvet evening gown, the train sweeping the floor. Around her neck hung an emerald necklace her father had given her, matched with teardrop earrings from the same collection. Her long hair was pinned up, showcasing the elegant lines of her neck. Her makeup was understated. A woman her age didn't need heavy makeup to prove anything. Time itself was the best testament. The entire room fell completely silent for 3 full seconds. Then the sound of camera shutters crashed down like a torrential downpour. Claire held Leo's hand, walking down the steps one by one. Leo wore a custom-tailored mini tuxedo, his bow tie matching the color of her gown. His little dress shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He walked like a little prince. His hand held Claire's fingers. Not too tight, not too loose. His gaze swept calmly over the faces of the guests in the room. As they walked through the crowd, the whispers surged up behind them like a tidal wave. Is that Claire Sterling? Wasn't she recovering abroad? Who's the kid next to her? Her son? Did she remarry? Wait. Look closely at that kid's face. Why does he look just like... The speaker didn't finish the sentence, because they saw the people standing behind Claire and swallowed the second half of the sentence entirely. In the corner stood the Vance Innovations Group. Robert Vance leaned on his cane, accompanied by a few veteran Vance shareholders. And standing at the very front was a man in a meticulously tailored black suit. His frame was a size thinner than 3 years ago, but the structure remained. That face still carried the remnants of his former spirited contours. Julian Vance. He held a glass of red wine, his elbow frozen at an unnatural angle. His fingers gripped the stem of the glass so tightly his knuckles were white. He stood rooted to the spot. His gaze wasn't on Claire. He was looking at Leo. He saw Leo's face. That little face, which looked practically copy-pasted from his own, was tilted up, curiously observing everything in the banquet hall. Leo saw him too. One large, one small, 2 identical faces locked eyes across the entire banquet hall. Leo looked at him for about 3 seconds, tilted his head, and then, as if coming to a conclusion, let out a soft "oh." He turned around and tugged on the hem of Claire's dress. Mommy, he lowered his voice, using a volume only the 2 of them could hear. I saw the idiot. Claire leaned down and asked in the same volume, what do you think? Leo thought for a moment, then said very seriously, uglier than the photo. Claire almost broke character, and then Leo did something she absolutely didn't expect. He let go of her hand, and taking small, deliberate steps, walked straight toward Julian. His little dress shoes clicked on the marble floor. Tap, 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 every step steady. The entire crowd of guests parted like Moses splitting the Red Sea, automatically carving a path. Everyone was watching to see what this child was going to do. The wine glass in Julian's hand trembled. Leo stopped directly in front of him and looked up. A 3-year-old child looking up at a 6-foot-tall adult man is at a massive disadvantage posture-wise. But Leo's aura didn't yield an inch. "Mister," he spoke. His voice was childish, but his articulation was terrifyingly clear. "Hello." Julian opened his mouth, but couldn't force out a single word. "Mister, you don't need to be nervous," Leo thoughtfully added, then clasped his hands in front of him, tilted his head, and looked at him. "I just want to ask one question." "Ask." Julian crouched down, trying hard to make his voice sound normal. "I heard you used to know my mommy," Leo said, pointing in Claire's direction. "Is that true?" Julian followed his finger and saw the woman in the midnight blue gown amidst the crowd. 3 years unseen. She had been sculpted by time into someone even more beautiful. So beautiful, it made his own breathing feel like a debt he could never repay. "Yes," his voice went hoarse. "I know your mommy." "Then are you?" Leo paused, blinked his eyes, and using an innocent but lethally destructive tone, asked, "The idiot who tried to pursue my mommy back then and failed?" The entire banquet hall was as if someone hit mute. Everyone holding a wine glass pricked up their ears to listen. Julian froze there. His lips moved for a long time, but he couldn't say a word. "It's okay, mister." Leo patted his knee, like comforting a classmate who failed a test. "My mommy is very hard to pursue. Failing isn't embarrassing." Having said his piece, he turned and walked away, leaving an entire hall of dumbfounded guests in his wake. Claire stood in the crowd, watching Leo jog back to her side. He looked up, flashed a little smile, and winked. "Mommy," I finished asking, "did you get your answer?" Leo nodded earnestly. "Verified. He's even dumber than I thought." As soon as he finished, he seemed to remember something else. He gently tugged Claire's dress, signaling her to bend down. Claire put her ear near his little mouth. Leo's sweet, milky voice articulated a sentence that silenced the room once again. "The mister's eyesight isn't very good either." Claire took a deep breath, leaned down, picked him up, and kissed his forehead. "Baby is right." From beginning to end, she didn't look at Julian once. The clamor of the gala resumed and lasted for about half an hour. Leo said to Claire, "Mommy, the champagne here smells too strong. I want to go eat some cake." Claire set him down and told him to find Martha, but didn't follow him, knowing full well this child wasn't actually going for cake. He had never had much of a sweet tooth. Sure enough, Leo walked straight toward a round table in the corner where 5 or 6 middle-aged men were seated. Several Vance Innovations directors and Sterling Capital executives were gathered there, arguing red in the face over the terms of an acquisition proposal. As Leo walked by, his eyes were drawn to the project proposal spread open on the table. He stopped, stood on his tiptoes to take a look, and let out a soft huh. This not-so-quiet hum of doubt was caught by a VP of Finance from Vance, a man in his 40s who was currently tearing his hair out over a data discrepancy in the plan. He waved a hand impatiently. "Kid, don't touch." Leo didn't leave. He watched for another moment, then looked up and delivered a less-than-quiet critique. A 12% premium to acquire a company with a compound annual growth rate of only 3.7%? Did you guys at Vance find your money on the street? The area around the round table fell instantly silent. The VP's mouth fell open, his pen dropping onto the table. An executive next to him frowned and leaned in. "Kid, who taught you to say that?" Leo didn't answer. He stood on his toes, reached out a tiny finger, and pointed to a specific data point on the proposal. His pace was unhurried, but every word hit like a stone cast squarely into their faces. "You ignored the risk of goodwill impairment. This company's core assets are 3 biotech projects still in the patent review phase. The approval rate is less than 40%. If you acquire them at a 12% premium, the moment those patents are rejected, the paper loss on this investment will exceed $1.5 billion. Dead silence. The VP of Finance's face turned the color of bruised liver. Leo pulled his hand back, stuffed it into his pocket, and tilted his head slightly. "Of course, this is just my personal opinion. You don't have to listen. After all, it's not my money you're losing." Julian had squeezed through the crowd at some point. He stood there holding his glass, his knuckles white, just in time to hear Leo's final sentence. "It's not my money you're losing." A 3-year-old child critiquing a multi-billion-dollar corporate acquisition for a publicly traded company. The terminology was flawless, the logic crystal clear, the data citation perfectly accurate. The tone was calm but lethal. The VP's face went from purple to red. "What does a kid like you know?" Leo didn't get angry. He just tilted his head, giving the VP a look that seemed to say, "Do you want the polite truth or the brutal truth?" Then he spoke. His speed was unhurried, every word landing with impact. "Would you like me to explain it to you in another language? English, French, German, take your pick." In the corner, an older European man holding a coffee suddenly burst out laughing. He was the most senior international investment banker present tonight, having watched the whole scene from the sidelines. He stepped forward, bent down, and asked Leo in fluent French, "Little boy, do you read French newspapers?" Leo turned to look at him and replied flawlessly in French, "I'm probably more familiar with the financial section of Le Figaro than you are, monsieur. By the way, that analysis you published last week on the Eurozone inflation rate had a flaw in its data citation." The old banker nearly spilled his coffee. He stared at Leo wide-eyed, his amused smile shifting into shock, and then into the kind of expression one reserves for observing an endangered species. "Mon Dieu," he muttered in French, slowly straightening up. "Where did this kid come from?" Leo shrugged and replied casually in French, "Zurich." Then he turned to walk away. As he passed Julian, he seemed to remember something, paused, looked up, and said in perfect English, "Mister, your team needs replacing. That M&A proposal you were just discussing is worse than a kindergarten group project. Of course, it's mostly their fault, but it also shows that as a boss, your eye for talent is pretty terrible." The air in the room froze solid in that second. Leo finished his thought and walked away, his little figure weaving unhurriedly through the crowd toward the dessert table, acting as if he had merely dropped a bomb in passing and had no interest in watching the explosion. And the bomb had definitely detonated. Behind him, the faces of those men shifted from red to white to green. They gripped their wine glasses so hard they nearly shattered them. Meanwhile, Lily Brooks, who had accompanied Julian, was gripping her own champagne flute, the veins on the back of her hand popping. She glared at that little face so identical to Julian's yet treating him with total disregard and felt a rush of heat shoot straight to her head. She slammed her glass onto a passing waiter's tray, her heels clicking sharply as she took a few quick steps and blocked Leo's path. "Little boy," she said, her voice attempting to force a curve, but the edges of that curve were trembling. "Whose child are you?" Leo stopped in his tracks and looked up at her. In that glance there was no curiosity, no childish innocence, only a premature, disturbingly calm scrutiny. "And who are you, ma'am? What do you want?" Lily's mouth twitched. "Little boy, you can call me sister." Your smile lines suggest that title is inappropriate. Someone in the crowd sucked in a sharp breath. The carefully constructed veneer of gentleness on Lily's face finally cracked. She took a step forward, leaned down, and hissed, "You and your mother, neither of you are anything good." Leo didn't step back. He stood firmly in place, raised his eyes, and kept his volume moderate, yet loud enough for everyone around to hear perfectly. "Ma'am, I am only a 3-year-old child. I don't understand what you mean by anything good." However, he paused, pointing a small finger at his own bow tie. "Please maintain a professional distance. Step away from me. Otherwise, my legal team will teach you the meaning of decency." "You? A 3-year-old with a legal team?" "A 3-year-old doesn't need a lawyer," Leo said earnestly. "But my mommy has them. My mommy's legal team just won a $10 billion transnational antitrust M&A case last year. If you're interested, you can look up their win rate before deciding whether you want to continue raising your voice at me." Lily's lips trembled for a long time before she finally lost control and shrieked, "Who do you think you are? You think because your mother has a little money she's invincible? Back in the day, your mother was nothing but a—" Her pretty face flushed bright red, her voice piercing, but her sentence was cut off by a cold, crisp voice. "Nothing but a what?" Every eye in the room snapped toward the source of the sound. Claire walked down the spiral staircase, her heels tapping a measured, unhurried rhythm against the marble. She had changed into a tailored black velvet suit paired with matching stilettos. Her face held no expression, but her aura alone had already pressed the entire banquet hall into dead silence. Leo ran to her side. She rested a hand on his shoulder, glanced down at him, then raised her eyes and locked them onto Lily's face. Lily took a step back. 3 years ago, this woman was Sister Claire to her. Claire hadn't bothered to destroy her then because she still considered Julian her husband. Now that she didn't even acknowledge Julian, what the hell was Lily Brooks to her? "Lily." Claire walked up to her, her voice light, but every word measured out like a ruler. "You were about to say, back in the day I was nothing but a what? Can't say it? Then let me help you." She kept one hand on Leo's shoulder, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. "You probably wanted to say, back in the day I was nothing but a neglected housewife tossed aside by her husband, right?" Lily didn't speak, but the resentful glint in her eyes answered for her. "Then do you remember?" Claire took a step forward, forcing Lily's back against the edge of a dining table. "How much dowry I brought when I married Julian Vance." Lily swallowed hard. $1 billion in cash, 3 core supply chain networks, plus 3 board seats for the Sterling family. Claire answered for her, then tilted her head. "What did you bring him? A couple's trip to Paris? Or 17 Hermes bags?" Lily's lips trembled. The eyes of every single person in the banquet hall were glued to her and Claire. The financial reporters held up their phones, the sound of camera shutters completely vanishing. They weren't taking photos, they were recording video. There is something you might never have understood. Claire's voice was peaceful, like reasoning with a clueless child. Julian didn't abandon me. I threw him away. There's a massive difference. Take your time and think it over. With that, she took Leo's hand and turned to leave, not giving Lily a second glance. Behind them came the sound of shattering glass. Someone had dropped their wine glass. It didn't matter anymore. And in the corner, Julian had completely lost the ability to react. He stood rooted in place, his fingers gripping so tight they had gone white. That face, which had once beamed with pride on the covers of business magazines, now held only a hollow, deathly pallor. Leo didn't look at him. He held Claire's hand and walked forward. His little dress shoes tapped against the marble, every step echoing crisply through the cavernous hall. For an entire week following the gala, the city's financial circle dissected every single detail of that night. Although the video was blurred, the trending hashtag number 3-year-old prodigy roast tech execs hit over 300 million views on X. Julian locked himself in his study and watched that video countless times. Every time he watched it, it felt like someone was dragging a dull saw back and forth across his chest. Every look, every word from the little boy on the screen felt like flesh being carved directly from his heart. He looked so much like him. The brow, the nose, the curve of the lips. He was practically a miniature clone. But his last name was Sterling. He didn't call him Dad, he called him Mr. Lily had been unusually quiet these past few days. She locked herself in the guest room, her phone on Do Not Disturb, keeping the curtains drawn. It wasn't that she didn't want to throw a tantrum. She didn't dare. At the gala, she finally understood one absolute truth. In front of Claire Sterling, she was less than nothing. Her sweetheart halo was thinner than paper against billions of dollars, but her hatred hadn't diminished one bit. She scoured the internet like a madwoman, searching for information on Claire and Leo Sterling. From social media to financial reports to anonymous gossip forums, she wanted to find Claire's weak spot. She needed a knife to stab back with. And then she found it. In an anonymous thread on a gossip forum, someone mentioned that the father section on Leo Sterling's birth certificate was blank. Someone replied to the thread saying that to prove the child was Julian's, a DNA paternity test was needed. Lily's eyes lit up. She remembered something. Years ago, on the sofa in the Vance family estate, she had found a strand of hair. Claire's hair was very long, and this one still had the follicle attached. She had casually tucked it into the lining of her phone case. She had told herself she was keeping it as a memento, just a whim at the time. She never expected it to become the most vicious weapon in her arsenal. As long as she got that kid's DNA sample and compared it to Julian's, she could prove he was a Vance. Then she would throw the report in Claire's face. You claim to be so independent, you claim the child takes your name, but in the end, didn't you just steal a Vance seed? The more she thought about it, the more excited she got. She spent a whole day finding a black market DNA testing agency online, agreed on a price, and mailed the hair. They told her once the sample arrived, results would take 3 to 5 business days. Clutching her phone case, she felt like she held the ultimate weapon. A few days later, in an attempt to salvage their collapsing reputation, Vance Innovations partnered with several investment banks to host a brand rebuilding press conference. They rented an entire floor of the convention center. The red carpet was even longer than the last one. Lily arrived early. She wore a bright red strapless gown. This was her carefully selected battle armor. Red meant war. Today, she was here to declare war. Claire arrived too. Today she wore a pure black tailored jumpsuit. Sharp, cold, elegant. She wore no excess jewelry, only a simple platinum band on her left ring finger. Julian, sitting in the front row of the VIP section, saw that ring, and the spark in his eyes died out. It wasn't a wedding ring. The wedding ring he had given her had been left behind in the mansion 3 years ago. This was a new one, a completely unfamiliar ring he had never seen before. Halfway through the event, the open networking session began. Claire was standing by the catering tables chatting with industry representatives when a shrill female voice suddenly exploded behind her. Claire Sterling. Lily, teetering on 4-inch stilettos, charged out of the crowd. She held a manila envelope high in the air. The expression on her face bordered on manic elation. Her eyeliner was drawn thick, looking under the lights like 2 jagged wounds across her face. Didn't you say your son's last name is Sterling? Everyone, look at this. She ripped the envelope open, pulling out several sheets of paper that fluttered in the air before she gripped them tight. Her voice was shrill, shrieking at the entire room of guests. I am holding a DNA paternity report. This bitch's son is not a Sterling. She pointed at Leo, then turned and pointed at Claire. This child is yours and Julian's. You hid the Vance bloodline and kept it from him. You vicious woman. The room erupted into an uproar. Leo was sitting quietly on a sofa, holding a small plate of macarons. He looked up at Lily. His eyes were calm in a way that didn't belong to a 3-year-old child. He waited for 3 full seconds, waiting for her shrieking to completely die down. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the entire exhibition hall. So what? The smile on Lily's face froze instantly. Leo placed the macaron back on the plate, picked up a napkin, and wiped his fingers. He stood up. He tugged at the hem of his little suit jacket, standing like a student answering a teacher in class, speaking with perfect enunciation. I am a Sterling. I took my mommy's last name. I was born in Zurich, and I hold a Swiss passport. Is there a problem? He tilted his head and added, Lady, using a DNA report to prove something the entire world already knows. Your IQ is making the macarons cry. The crowd's attention shifted entirely between Lily and Leo. No one noticed the old man who had been sitting silently in the corner of the lounge area suddenly bring his cane down hard against the floor. Enough. Robert Vance stood up. His movements were slow, but every motion carried an unquestionable, commanding authority. He walked over to Lily, pulled a document from his breast pocket, and slapped it directly onto the coffee table next to her. Miss Brooks, his voice was old but steady as a drumbeat. This report in your hand. I had it done 3 months ago. Lily stood frozen. I am telling you, this child absolutely has Vance blood running through his veins. The old man paused, his gaze sweeping across Lily's face. There was no anger in his eyes, only a heavy, ancient sorrow. But you should also know why he cannot take the Vance name. Lily's lips trembled. She couldn't say a word. Robert Vance didn't look at her again. He turned to face the entire room of guests, his back ramrod straight, and spoke in a deep voice. Everyone present today, bear witness. As of this moment, I, Robert Vance, unconditionally transfer my 18% personal stake in Vance Innovations to my grandson, Leo Sterling. This transfer agreement has been notarized and takes effect immediately. The hall went dead silent for 3 seconds. Then the sound of camera shutters exploded. Julian bolted up from his seat, his face ghostly pale. Dad! Robert Vance didn't turn around. Leaning on his cane, he walked step by step until he stood in front of Leo. He bent down and spoke in a voice so gentle, so close to pleading, that no one in the room had ever heard him use it before. Leo, Grandpa is sorry. Leo looked at the white-haired old man in front of him. He stayed silent for a moment, then reached out a small hand and patted the back of Robert's hand. Grandpa Vance, he said, you don't need to apologize. My mommy says the biggest difference between good people and bad people isn't whether they make mistakes, but whether they have the courage to own up to them. He pulled his hand back and stood up straight. You are a good person. Dead silence. Robert Vance's eyes reddened. He had seen countless storms in his life. He wouldn't blink at the most ruthless corporate warfare. But this little boy had dismantled him with a single sentence. He straightened his back, leaned on his cane, turned to face everyone, and using the last shred of dignity he had left in this life, said 5 words, "This family's sins are mine." At that moment, Lily went completely insane. She grabbed the DNA report off the table and tore it in half, then into quarters. She ripped it into confetti that fluttered through the air. She tore at it, her whole body shaking, tears washing the thick eyeliner down her face. She kept muttering something under her breath, so quietly only she could hear it. No one stepped forward to stop her, because her actions were entirely meaningless now. The reporters aimed their lenses, their shutters firing rapidly. No one was photographing her. Everyone was photographing Robert Vance's equity transfer document. They were photographing Leo's calm little face. She was discarded amidst a pile of shredded paper, like a jellyfish washed ashore by the tide, unable to return to the sea, silently dehydrating and vanishing under the sun. After Robert Vance's declaration hit the floor, the banquet hall remained completely silent for a long time. It wasn't just a normal quiet. It was a suffocating silence where everyone held their breath, terrified of missing a single detail. The financial reporters fired their shutters in a frenzy. The investment bankers exchanged loaded glances. The Vance board members' faces turned ashen. The 18% stake in the old man's hands was the stabilizing pillar of Vance Innovations, and he just gave it away. To a 3-year-old child. Julian shoved his way out of the crowd and grabbed Robert's arm. Dad, have you gone crazy? His voice trembled. It wasn't anger. It was a terror he was experiencing for the first time in his life, a chill shooting from the soles of his feet straight to the crown of his head. He gripped Robert's cuff tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes full of disbelief. That's 18%. You gave it to her. You gave it to the Sterlings. Vance Innovations is finished. Do you understand? Robert Vance didn't shake him off. He just looked down at his son's hand clutching his sleeve. That hand used to be so small, gripping his index finger and refusing to let go, crying out for Daddy to hold me. Now, that hand was grown, the knuckles defined, wearing a six-figure luxury watch, yet clutching at a truth he was too terrified to face. 18%. Robert's voice was raspy, but every word carried weight. You think that's a lot? Julian froze. When Claire married into the Vance family, the old man looked straight into his son's eyes and articulated every syllable. She brought nearly $1 billion in cash, 3 core supply chains, and 5 board seats. You used her money to expand your market, acquire competitors, and package yourself as a young visionary for magazine covers. In 3 years, you burned through more than $2 billion of her money. He paused, slamming his cane hard against the floor. Every single thing she took away today, which one of them didn't originally belong to her. Julian's grip loosened. But she set a trap. She set me up. A layer of mist finally covered Robert's aged eyes. Did she hire someone to kidnap you to Paris? Did she force you to sleep with Lily Brooks? Did she smash your phone so you couldn't receive company calls? The old man took a deep breath, his voice finally fracturing, not breaking. It was like an old house that had stayed silent for too long, finally unable to hold back a creak. Julian, she was married to you for 3 years. How many times did you go with her to visit her family? Do you even remember her birthday? Do you remember if she was carrying a boy or a girl? Do you remember her due date? When she called you and told you her stomach hurt, what did you say? Julian's face was as white as paper. You said, "Stop being dramatic," Robert answered for him. She told Martha the pain was so bad she couldn't stand up. You didn't answer her calls. She fell on the stairs. You weren't there. If Martha hadn't found her, she would have died in that mansion. The day she went into the delivery room, there were only 2 people beside her. Her father, and the Sterling employee you thought was a maid. The father section on the child's birth certificate is blank. Julian stumbled backward, knocking over a bar stool behind him. The metal slammed against the marble floor with a deafening crash. He took the equity transfer document from his father's hand and flipped to the final page. It had Robert Vance's signature, the red seal of the notary office, and a note written in black fountain pen on the dotted line. This equity permanently belongs to Leo Sterling, unaffected by his parents' marital status. If Leo Sterling is a minor, his mother, Claire Sterling, shall exercise all rights on his behalf. The date was 3 days ago. But what truly made his breathing stop wasn't the date. It was the word under the relationship column. The ink strokes were light, as if the pen had hesitated for a long time before pressing down. The paper even showed a tiny ink blot where the nib had rested for too long. It was the word grandson. Where Robert Vance signed as the donor, the legal format required him to state the relationship. Legally, he should have written grandson. But he wrote the G-R-A-N-D, stopped the pen, couldn't write the rest, and skipped straight to filling out the date. A word that had belonged to him for 70 years. He suddenly couldn't bring himself to write it. Julian stared at that word for a very long time. Then he looked up, meeting Claire's calm gaze from across the room. When Leo was born, Claire had Mr. Hayes slip a newborn photo into the files sent to Robert Vance. The old man sat alone in his study at the estate, wearing his reading glasses, looking at it for an entire afternoon. Later, the Vance family butler told Claire that the old man deposited a sum of money into a private account every month. The account was titled Leo's Education Fund. He never told anyone. That money was quietly deposited, like a form of atonement. Julian knew none of this. Right now, clutching that equity transfer, he felt like he wasn't holding a document, but a debt he could never repay in his lifetime. When he looked up at Claire, the whites of his eyes were bloodshot, so red it looked like the veins were about to burst. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something. Her name, his usual excuses, a defense. Something was stuck in his throat, lodged up high, refusing to go down, like a fishbone. Claire didn't speak. She didn't even look at him. She picked Leo up from the sofa and kissed his forehead. Leo wrapped his arms around her neck and suddenly whispered in her ear, "Mommy," Grandpa Vance cried. He said he was very sad because he did some bad things. Leo was silent for a moment. Will he change? He doesn't have the chance to anymore, Claire said. Some people spend their youth busy making money. When they get old, they suddenly remember they want to love their sons, love their wives, love their grandsons. But when they finally stop and look back, there is no one left standing behind them. Leo rested quietly on her shoulder for a moment, then softly said something Claire had never taught him. The Then his heart must really hurt. Claire didn't answer. She held Leo and turned to walk away. From behind came Julian's raspy, broken voice. Claire. She stopped walking. What do I have to do for you to forgive me? The air went quiet again. The reporter's hands holding the cameras were shaking. Not from fatigue, but from tension. Julian's question was essentially handing the knife directly to Claire. She set Leo down, pulled her phone from her clutch, opened an image, and handed it to Julian. He took it and looked down. On the screen was the complete chain of evidence Martha had compiled. Chat logs, wire transfers, voice recordings. Lily saying to make sure she didn't keep the baby. Martha asking cash or wire. Lily saying wire. Every word sliced his heart open, stroke by stroke. If I report this to the police, Claire said, she will be charged with attempted murder. Her sentence won't be less than 10 years. Are you going to stop me? The hand holding the phone trembled violently. Are you going to stop me? Claire looked him in the eyes. Didn't you say in Paris that she was the love of your life? Are you going to stop me now? He still didn't speak. His lips quivered, the redness in his eyes spreading across his entire face. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down several times, but he couldn't force out a single word. Claire took the phone back. Julian, she looked into his eyes. You think this is the only evidence? He didn't understand. She pulled the signed equity transfer document out of his hand, flipped to the last page, and folded the corner. Your father could give this equity to Leo because 3 years ago, at that board meeting, he voted for me. Julian's pupils contracted violently. Did you really not know who cast the deciding vote for your dismissal? Do you think Sterling Capital had enough votes on its own without a crucial third party? Want to know who that third party was? She pushed the document against his chest. Her voice wasn't loud, but it struck like a hammer. It was your father. The entire hall went dead, silent for 3 seconds. Then someone sucked in a sharp breath. Even the investment bankers in the distance looked utterly shocked. Robert Vance, the founder of Vance Innovations, Julian's biological father. In the vote to oust his own son 3 years ago, he cast a vote in favor. Julian turned to look at Robert. The old man did not avoid his gaze. He stood there, leaning on his cane, his back straight. There were tears in his eyes, but he did not look away. When Claire told me about this, Robert's voice was old but steady as an ancient tree. She only made one condition. She said, Dad, I will not let Vance Innovations collapse, but Julian cannot sit in that chair anymore. He paused. As he said those words, a tear finally slipped from the corner of his eye. Do you know why she still wanted to protect the company? She said, Dad, your legs are bad. Remember to put a blanket over your knees in the winter. Julian's body swayed. It was as if every bone in his body had been extracted. He dropped straight down. His knees slammed into the marble floor with a heavy, muffled thud. He was kneeling. The marble floor of the convention center was freezing, but he kneeled there as if he couldn't feel the cold. His lips moved. His voice was so quiet only he and Claire could hear it. I'm sorry. He said it again. Claire, I'm sorry. Claire looked at him for 3 seconds, shifted Leo to her other arm, turned around, and walked away. If I'm sorry worked, the days she spent lying alone in that bedroom wouldn't have been so endless. If I'm sorry worked, the moment she called him in agony, only to hear stop being dramatic, wouldn't have cut so deep into her bones. If I'm sorry worked, the father section on that birth certificate wouldn't be blank. Behind her came the rhythmic sound of Robert Vance's cane. He followed at an unhurried pace. He walked up to Leo and bent down, pointing at a small object peeking out of the breast pocket of Leo's little suit. It was a solid gold cufflink engraved with an oak leaf, the Vance family crest. Leo looked down at it. He had actually slipped it into his pocket earlier that afternoon when he and Martha had gone to the old estate to visit Robert. He actually really liked this quiet old man. Grandpa Vance, Leo said, I should return this to you. Robert didn't take it. He bent down, placed his old, wrinkled hand on Leo's shoulder, and spoke in a raspy voice that sounded like it was being squeezed from the very depths of his lungs. Keep it, grandson. This is the only right thing Grandpa has done in his entire life. He didn't look back at anyone. Leo gripped the cufflink tight and took Claire's hand. Together, they walked toward the exit. Sunlight poured in through the glass revolving doors, landing on Leo's soft hair. He suddenly looked up and asked Claire, Mommy, will Grandpa Vance come visit me? He will. What about that, mister? He will not, Claire said. Leo nodded. He didn't ask why. He gripped the cufflink, walking steadily. His little dress shoes stepped into the shifting light and shadows on the stairs, every step crisp, leaving no trace behind. The final shareholder meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 10 a.m. in the grand boardroom on the top floor of Vance Innovations headquarters. Julian had personally designed that boardroom. The curved floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city skyline. When he was CEO, his favorite thing was to stand by the window with a shot of espresso, watching the city unfold like a chessboard beneath him. Today was the last time he would stand here. His suit was immaculately pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair combed neatly, but his eyes betrayed him. The deep red veins showed he had stayed awake for nights on end. The lines at the corners of his mouth drooped heavily. He looked like a man crushed by an invisible weight. The Vance shareholders arrived one by one. The 40 chairs were fully occupied. The Sterling representative sat on the left side of the long table. Mr. Hayes sat at the head, a thick stack of documents spread before him. Robert Vance didn't come. His seat was empty. Only an untouched cup of green tea sat on the table, and the nameplate next to that empty seat read 3 words: Leo Sterling. At 9:58 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. Claire walked in holding Leo's hand. Today, Leo wore a navy blue suit, his bow tie perfectly straight, his hair flawless. He held a folder in his arms. It wasn't a toy. It was a real folder, containing a timeline he had compiled himself of Vance Innovation's core strategic failures over the past 3 years. He stopped in front of his designated seat, stood on his toes to place the folder on the table, then climbed into the chair by himself. He folded his hands on the table and looked straight ahead. Every single shareholder's eyes were locked onto this 3-year-old child. He didn't even blink. At exactly 10 a.m., Mr. Hayes stood up and cleared his throat. Gentlemen, per the statutory procedures of the extraordinary shareholder meeting, the first item on today's agenda, the motion to formally dismiss Mr. Julian Vance from his position as Executive CEO of Vance Innovations. He opened his folder. According to company bylaws, voting rights are calculated by equity percentage. The shareholders present and attending remotely today account for 94.3% of total equity. This exceeds the statutory 2/3 threshold. The vote begins now. The voting took less than 10 minutes. In truth, the vote was completely unnecessary. The outcome had been written in stone long ago. Sterling Capital held 36.8%. Plus, the 18% Robert Vance had transferred to Leo, exercised by Claire. Plus, the minor shareholders Sterling had quietly bought out over the past 3 years. The total far exceeded the majority. But protocol had to be followed. Mr. Hayes took the tally sheet from the secretary, glanced at it, and looked up, his voice level. Votes in favor of dismissal, 71.2%. Votes opposed, 18.3%. Abstentions, 10.5%. The motion passes by majority vote. He closed the folder. Mr. Vance, as of this moment, you are no longer the executive CEO of Vance Innovations. There was no applause in the room, no whispered discussions, only the squeak of leather chairs and the rustle of turning pages. Julian sat at the far end of the long table, both hands flat on the surface, his knuckles white. He showed no reaction. 10 full seconds passed. Then he stood up. His chair screeched harshly against the floor. Everyone waited for him to speak or storm out. He did neither. He walked around the table, step by step, stopping in front of Claire. And then, in front of nearly 40 shareholders, he dropped straight to his knees. His knees struck the marble floor with a heavy, sickening thud. Everyone froze. The shareholders stared at each other. The secretary covered her mouth and took a step back. Even Mr. Hayes did something rare. He stopped writing. Julian knelt there, looking up at Claire. His eyes were so red they looked ready to bleed. His lips trembled for a long time before he squeezed out a sentence. Claire, I'm sorry. For the past 3 years, I'm sorry. Give the child back to me, please. Give Leo back to me. I'll do anything you want. Claire looked down at him. 3 years ago, lying in the delivery room, she had imagined this exact scene countless times. She imagined him realizing his mistakes. Imagined him kneeling in front of her begging for forgiveness. Imagined him holding the baby, promising to be a good father. Back then, she relied on those fantasies to survive the darkest days of her postpartum recovery. Now, the fantasy had come true. He was kneeling in front of her, saying exactly what she had wanted to hear back then, word for word. But she felt absolutely no joy. It wasn't numbness. She truly, genuinely did not care anymore. It was like pulling an old shirt out of the closet that you wore 10 years ago and someone asking if you still want it. You look at the shirt, you know it used to belong to you, but you have grown into a completely different size. Get up. I won't. His voice shook. If you don't forgive me, I won't get up. Claire looked at him for a few seconds, then turned to look at Leo. Leo had been sitting quietly in his chair the entire time, watching this play out. He had seen a lot of big scenes, but a grown man kneeling in front of his mother was a first. His expression wasn't fearful. It wasn't smug. It was a quiet, evaluative gaze that transcended his age. Leo, do you have anything you want to say? Leo slid off his chair and walked over to Julian. One large face, one small face, less than 3 feet apart, looking at each other. Julian looked at him, the red in his eyes spreading further. This little face looked so much like his own. The eyebrows, the nose, the curve of the lips. It was as if God had deliberately cloned a more toward a version of him, purely to remind him of exactly what he had lost. Leo. His voice was so hoarse it was barely a whisper. I am your dad. Leo didn't answer. He stayed silent for a very long time. For an adult, a few seconds is nothing. But for a 3-year-old child, it was a long, suspended moment that required every ounce of courage he possessed to maintain. Then he turned around, putting his back to Julian. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the cufflink Robert Vance had left him. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a moment. My mommy says my last name is Sterling. He didn't look at anyone, just stared down at the cufflink, his voice soft but steady. My mommy says I was born in Zurich. It was snowing really hard that day. The whole city was white. My mommy says Grandma Martha was standing outside the delivery room holding me. She told the nurses this child's last name is Sterling. The father section is blank, because there was a man who gave up on him before he even knew how to breathe. Julian knelt on the floor, looking as if someone was systematically shattering him, inch by inch. Leo finally turned back to look at him. There was no anger on his little face, no sorrow, just a very earnest look at the man kneeling on the floor, as if confirming an answer he had already known for a long time. Mister, he said, his voice not loud, but carrying clearly through the entire boardroom. My mommy says there are 2 things in this life I can never forget. I cannot forget that my mommy almost died giving birth to me. And I cannot forget that my last name is Sterling. He paused again, then said a sentence that didn't belong in the mouth of a 3-year-old. So it isn't that I don't want you, it's that you didn't want me first. Dead silence. Julian's body swayed, his forehead nearly touching the floor. He didn't cry out loud, but his shoulders shook violently. He looked like a wild beast that had been shot by a hunter, collapsing in the snow. No howling, just weaker and weaker, ragged breathing. Leo watched him for a moment. Then he did something no one expected. He reached out a small hand and lightly patted Julian's shoulder. Just once. Very light. Get up, mister. The floor is cold. If you kneel too long, you might get arthritis. And then, he paused, adding a final blow. It would be really bad if you tried to sue the Sterling family for it. Then he turned around, walked over to Claire, and took her hand. His little hand was warm, the grip on her fingers exactly the same as always. Mommy, let's go home. Okay. Claire took his hand and walked toward the boardroom doors, never looking back at anyone in the room. Behind them came the sound of knees shifting. Julian struggled up from the floor, his voice so ragged it was unrecognizable. Claire. Leo. Claire didn't stop. Leo didn't stop. But right before he stepped out the door, Leo paused for half a second. He glanced out the window. The floor-to-ceiling windows on the 27th floor offered a view that stretched forever. The entire city sprawled out under the afternoon sun, like an unfinished game of chess. He looked for 2 seconds, then pulled his gaze back and matched Claire's pace. Mommy, the view out the window is actually pretty nice. Do you like it? But I don't want to look at the view from here. Why not? He thought about it, then answered very seriously. The coffee in this building is too bitter. Claire laughed softly and didn't reply. The doors closed slowly behind them. Whatever happened inside that boardroom had nothing to do with them anymore.